one of the very rare conferences where all of the speakers which being, in the agenda actually coming. And I think that the first session was very informative, and we had a lot of comments about Ministry of Finance, about Central Bank, about Ministry of Economic Development, about the current situation, what's going on. And then we had two panels on the regulatory changes and on the capital markets, raising capital for the Russian company. And I would like to do like a short introduction on basically what is the framework of the Russian infrastructure so far, what kind of step Moscow Exchange with the regulator have done in terms of the creation of central depository, in terms of the moving to T+ in September, and how it has influence on the volumes and everything. Basically, I will start with the fixed income market. We actually had significant growth in the fixed income market last year. One of the key drivers for the growth was actually CSD's access to international investors of the sovereign bond in the beginning of the year, and later in the beginning of this year, access to corporate bonds market. We are looking forward to some changes this year on the bond market. As has been speaking before, we expect a lot of activities on the bond market respect to the current situation as well. In terms of the outcomes of the Euroclear and Clearstream access to the sovereign bond and the corporate bond market, we have seen a significant increase of the interest of the foreign investors in the middle of last year, when the CSD actually started operating in Russia. And the amount of foreign investors out of the whole market was stabilized at about 20% of the total market. It's been slightly down at the beginning of this year, but generally it has been stable for the whole last year. For the corporate bond trading volumes and the account balances, we see some increase there as well, but it's too early to say because it's only started in January, and we hope that it would probably not be that dramatic as on the sovereign bond market, but I hope that it will be some substantial increase later this year. Talking to the equity market, as you probably heard, that one of the key highlights of the last year was moving to T+ and full functionality of central depository in Russia. If we're talking about key growth drivers from this year, it's certainly a listing reform. We do have a date set up for the 2nd of June when the listing reform will be actually coming to the force. We hope that all of the companies are preparing their corporate governance standard to the highest level as with their new corporate governance code, which has been recently adopted. And we see that a lot of questions are coming from the issuers to us, from both bond issuers and the equity issuers, and we're working quite closely with them to help them to adapt their standards. As a great result of the last year, I could say that we also had a lot of issuance on the Moscow Exchange, and we could say that we are proudly having had two companies which was listed only in Russia, which is Moscow Exchange and Alrosa. And I hope that we will see more company going forward, maybe not now, but in a few months, that the situation will be more stable. I would say that it was one of the great successes of the T+ reforms, and I'm sure that 1.3 billion Alrosa placement hasn't been that successful unless we have implemented all of the changes. This was basically the short introduction, and I think that we may focus more on this panel of the CSD access to the Russian market, and I'm handing over to Tim to start with this.
Okay, thank you, Anna. I think as mentioned, the first part we'd like to focus on the effects of Euroclear and Clearstream access to the Russian bond markets. More precisely, I think my first question I'd like to put to Mr. Zavarev from the Ministry of Finance and discuss the impact on financial stability and market in general. And maybe just to add to that, given sort of the interesting times we're living through right now, any thoughts? There have been obviously a lot of questions in the market about Ministry of Finance response to some of the volatility and whether capital controls as a measure is something that's being considered at the current time.
Thanks. First, we didn't abandon the idea of financial center in Moscow, and regardless of the current developments of the political situation. We are not actually trying to create the center, but we would rather to develop the center, because the infrastructure mostly is in place. Our meetings with the major investors when we go on trip or non-deal roadshows, so in New York and Hong Kong and in other major financial centers, proving that actually we have the feedback, and most of the investors saying that actually the infrastructure is in place. And I'd like to take this opportunity to praise again the efforts of the Moscow Exchange for what they've done over the past few years, and also the National Depository. They've made significant progress on the way on this path of creating infrastructure. And as the regulators, we are one of the major beneficiaries of this process of the presence of international major players like Euroclear and Clearstream at the markets. And that's resulted in a number of legislative changes over the past 3 years actually, that allowed us first to introduce government bonds access to Euroclear and Clearstream beginning in January 13, and then municipal and corporate bonds beginning in January 14. And we are actually pretty sure that we're persistent that we would do our best to meet the deadline that we already set for ourselves. Actually, the 1st of July, it's the date for the beginning of trading equities, the access for either Clearstream and Euroclear for the trading equities. Their presence, the US, UK, and Europe, they all have slightly different financial infrastructures. Same in our case, and the presence of the major players actually makes us find a way to make our system compatible and more understandable for international players, and in that way to have more access to the financial capital, more capital, because still, unfortunately, the market is still limited. I mean, the financial resources of the market. Although we've been successful with this our IPO at the local exchange, that proved that everything is set in place, all the instruments are ready, and they are operational. So waiting for its time, actually. And with this presence, again, our legislation is not getting worse, it's getting better. It's getting, we are creating more open financial market, and hopefully that will bring us new money.
I think that clearly the introduction of Euroclearability for government bonds has been a success in terms of liquidity in the market, a success for the Ministry of Finance to enable them to lengthen the duration of their curve to issue 15 years, and when market will permit, I guess they will also look at 20 years. There was a really big demand for international investors for this product, and it has been met, and we have now a pretty liquid market. I would still, use the occasion that we have a Deputy Minister of Finance to give a recommendation regarding the structure of the government bond market. I think that we need to increase the cap volumes on each series in order to have bigger tranches that are even more tradable and more liquid. I think that MiFID should also perhaps think about going into swap auctions, offering swap auctions whereby you will have the possibility to swap off the run against on the run issues. And third, I think that there is a need also to think about market making, committed market making, or primary dealership as is done in other countries, which will enable the market to be even more liquid. Regarding corporate domestic bonds and their euro clearability, I think that there is clearly no interest from international investors. This market is, the domestic market is too specific in terms of how the domestic bonds are structured with put options. The market is too short in terms of duration, and the legal aspect of having a debt under Russian law is making a lot of international investors uncomfortable. As a result, I don't think that we will see a sharp increase in the domestic corporate bond market by international investors. I think it will continue to be a very Russia-focused investor base that will act in this market. And the third, a small segment, which is sub-federal issuers. Here also, unless we don't have big issuers coming in this market, like City of Moscow or City of St. Petersburg, there is no interest by international investors, and the euro clearability will not change anything.
Okay, Boris, thank you very much for that. Next, I would like to turn to post-trading services and the impact that Euroclear and Clearstream access to Russian bonds has had. And first, ask Maria for her views on this from the perspective of the NSD.
Usually, thanks for the question. Usually we think about post-trading services as a last thing because it's not really interesting, and if we don't think about post-trading services, it means that everything is right with these post-trading services. Before Clearstream and Euroclear even started thinking about accessing the Russian market, I don't speak about Clearstream, who already on the market for a couple of years, and in a different way. Decided too young to explain how we were present in the market. But before that idea, we were so much behind everyone, so much behind all the markets. And to me, the Clearstream and Euroclear, with this the possibility for them to come to the Russian market, it's among many factors which triggered the creation of the CSD. So that's one of the most important things. Because here we take two very important players with many investors behind who might be interested in the Russian market, but the only condition is it has to be easy, it has to be reasonably cheap, and it has to be transparent. And when we realized, and when our regulators, Ministry of Finance, realized that we might sell better our market, we immediately thought about the ICSDs, but to welcome them in Russia, we had to have a proper structure. And the proper structure is, well, first of all, is a proper CSD. Of course, one of the major factors which helped the creation of CSD is the merger of two stock exchanges and consequent merger of the depository. But we shouldn't forget that Euroclear and Clearstream, they played a very important role in this event. Then, when we all decided that we should have a CSD, that we all agreed that okay, Clearstream and Euroclear, they might have a direct access to our market, came a question how we might service them. Of course, for them it was out of question to come directly without agent. They had to be serviced by someone, and each organization chose a provider for that. And then we as a CSD, we had to learn, first of all, we had to learn how to communicate with them on a daily basis. Of course, all the management, top management of NSD speaks English and understand well the structure and more or less understand well the needs of the international investors. But the client services, they had to start speaking English. We had to set up a network service, we had to set up a product department. And after came very interesting things, because these institutions, they are used to work with many markets. That's the case for global custodians as well, but here it's like a big factory. They have like 42 or 47 market clearing, more than 50 euro clear, if I'm not mistaken. Right? So then they started asking us an easy question, the question regarding the taxation, corporate actions, ways of communication, and also how you identify the clients, what are your terms and conditions, why they are not in English, how we can be serviced by the service desk in English for different questions. So all that we had to learn and learn very quickly. So for me, from that practical perspective, from that practical point of view, it helped us a lot and it helped the market as well. Because ourselves being more closer to the regulator than our friends custodians, we can first, so we are receiving the questions from Euroclear or Clearstream. We are also becoming more proactive. We are going to them. We are also asking the advice of the direct investors. And then we pass this knowledge to our colleagues on the market. So I'm now very interested to hear what Philip might say regarding this same topic.
Yes, I think it'd be a good opportunity. Philip, do you have any views you'd like to share?
I think first the people in Moscow should be very proud of what they've achieved in the last 3 years. I think that, as Maria mentioned, as Yuri mentioned, for us to be able to offer access to the Russian markets to foreign investors, there was a need for a serious number of changes, technical changes, but also legislative changes. And I must say that we've had a lot of support from the Ministry of Finance, from the market infrastructure, from the central bank, from the bank that we've appointed as our agent locally. And without the assistance of all of those people, we would probably not have been able to do what we have done in a relatively short period of time. And I think what's really striking is the willingness from Moscow to open up itself to become like any other markets, and that has moved pretty quickly. So it has been, as it has been mentioned, the success for OFZ was pretty significant. In a matter of 6 months, I think that the Ministry of Finance enjoyed a low rate for some issuance, and we see the foreign holding moving from something like 3% to slightly above 20%. The good news in the current market conditions is that we haven't seen any outflow of foreign investors. So the last 8 weeks, I would say, the positions have remained stable, which is also a sign that while for corporate bonds there is clearly a lack of appetite today, there is trust from the foreign investors into the Russian market. Given the current circumstances, we should take this as a very positive signal. So it was a first step. We'll, I guess, talk about equities in a moment.
Thank you. Yeah, I think just to continue on the same topic on bonds for a moment, and then we'll move on to the equity component of the presentation. And this, I'd like to position a question to both Alex as well as Jan from Euroclear. Can we say that direct access of international depositories is an incentive for development of the Russian market infrastructure?
Well, we have been very fortunate from the beginning that NSD, when in 2009, 2010 we saw the first signs that, okay, we're going to recreate a post-trade market infrastructure here in Russia, that they involved us from the beginning. And we created a very beautiful type of cross-fertilization whereby we could exchange with NSD the experience of us having during 40 years created or helped to create post-trade infrastructures in other jurisdictions. Now this was for us a big, I mean, it doesn't happen a lot anymore that you come to, let's say, a very large capital market where you have the chance to build it together with the local market infrastructure. And from the beginning we have taken the approach, Euroclear, Clearstream and NSD, that what we're going to build is about opening up the markets. It's not about barriers. It's not about, okay, we have to do this because it's a good marketing that we can tell to the outside world that the Russian market is now linked to an ICSD. This was a very fundamental choice by NSD that we're going to open up, but we are not going to open up only according to our own NSD view. We are going to consult on a continuous basis with the two ICSDs. And what we have built is functional. It worked from day one. And it doesn't stop there, because we delivered now together with them a settlement infrastructure within ICSDs. But we see that momentum that we had in building this, we see this continue. We talk now about collateral management. How can we more or less have a collateral management market in Russia which reflects some of the principles that are being used by ICSDs? How can we use Russian bonds or assets in collateral management programs within the ICSDs? There's now cross-communication and cross-collaboration on other topics like investment funds, trade repositories. So yes, this exercise has been very, very beneficial, not only for actually delivering a settlement system.
Yeah, I have to agree with what's been said before. In particular, I mean, what Maria was talking about and Anna. I mean, for us to get here in terms of allowing the ICSDs access to the Russian fixed income space, you know, I guess as a result of all the other changes that have taken place before that, predominantly, you know, I guess the initial step was the merger between the two stock exchanges, then the creation of the CSDs, and I guess this is a result of that. Certainly from a foreign investor perspective, this has been seen as a very positive step. We've obviously, as a local custodian, may not be as happy as some of the other local custodians here may not be happy, in the sense that a lot of the fixed income inventory had moved from the local custodians into the ICSDs. However, there are obviously benefits to that. In particular, you know, what we've heard already from Jan in terms of, you know, those assets being used in collateral programs. If you're a broker dealer, that's a huge upside for you, that you can use those Russian bonds, you know, to collateralize your repo, your stock loan, or your derivatives activity. But the one point I wanted to make is really, I think what's brought all of this change, and I've been involved in this market for over 10 years, has been the political willingness and the willingness of the infrastructures to change and adapt international standards. I think the more standardization you have in any market, not just Russia, the more investment inflows you can expect, because people like standardization. And that's in the form of investor protection as well. Investors have to have the same level of protection as international investors have to have the same level of protection as domestic investors. They have to be treated in the same way from a legal certainty perspective. And I think, you know, in the last 2 or 3 years, we have seen a huge amount of change, and I would say very positive. And you know, I'd like to thank Eddie Astani and obviously Alexander Afanasiev, who have been real kind of drivers of change in liaising between the international community, the Ministry of Finance, the regulators, the central bank, and really to get these ideas implemented and effective as they have done in the last 2 to 3 years.
Thank you, and I think it's actually a nice segue into our next segment on the possible effect of Euroclear and Clearstream, future direct access to the equity markets. I guess I'd like to start out and understand a little bit better what are the legislative changes that are required, and I'd like to put this question to the Deputy Minister.
Thank you. In our communication with the Clearstream and Euroclear mainly, we understand that what is left and on what we are focusing our efforts right now is the proxy vote issues, and most of the job already been done. The description of the problem is on the list already, and we know what are the key changes needed. Actually, it all relates to corporate actions right now, and we've been through this list of design projected changes already with NSD, with Euroclear, and beginning of April we're finalizing with the stock exchange as well. We're finalizing with the major issues, and with the pretty good chances that we will have okay from their part as well, and we will move with the procedures, legal procedures. I mean, introducing this legislation draft to the Duma. Through this procedure would take at least with the public revision requirement would take at least 45 days, and that would bring us to the mid of May, and we, I would say, still have pretty good chances to have this legislation passed during the spring session of the Parliament, so that means by the 1st of July. And I think that this is the major issue, what is left. So it's all work, most of the work, most of the job being done during the year 2013. And I would remind that we introduced at the end of the last year the cascade, the taxation principle, and also the nominal accounts with NSD that bring us a new approach to even to approach to taxation issues even in other fields. I would remind, what does it mean? We cascade principle means that we impose a flat tax of 30% on dividends and related income, unless the bondholders or the owners of the equity, not equities, but still bonds, presenting the proof that they are subject to double taxation treaties. And using this double taxation treaty, this flat tax of 30% could be decreased to 10%, 5%, or even 0%, depending on the country of residence. So that actually also stimulates our clients and our counterparts to disclose the information on their taxation residence, which is important, and we would like to actually implement this in other fields as well. That's with regard to what is left to do just in recent months, and we're ready to do that. And yeah, I guess I leave it here.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think on the next question we had quite a lively discussion before we started the panel in the side room. A question, I'll have a couple of people comment on this, but how can we make access to the market easier for international investors? And what are the changes and challenges in market practice and procedures? Maybe start with Maria, and then I'll pass it on to Philippe and Alex if they have additional comments.
Thank you. I would add to what Mr. Zubarev just said, that yeah, corporate actions definitely, the cascade payments, the disclosure, the proxy voting, so electronic voting, that's still the open issues, and they will be sorted out by the end of this year, or already for 1st of July, that's the date which was fixed, the deadline fixed for Christian Euroclear to access the market for equities. NSD will be operational to allow these institutions to start the operations in Russia. And I have to be honest with you, as everything is going so quickly at NSD on the legislation side and almost everywhere on the Russian market, I had to double check with my colleagues from corporate actions just before this panel starts, where we are exactly regarding our KPIs for the 2014, and they confirmed to me, they are the specialists, that we will be definitely ready for 1st of July to start working with equities with the international institutions, and then by the end of this year we will sort out the question of the electronic voting. I don't want to eat the bread of my colleagues who will be speaking. There will be another very interesting panel right after our panel, and it will be specifically regarding corporate actions with the international experts who will be on the panel, but also with my colleagues who are in charge of the big major project. So I leave the question of corporate actions. It's just I finish with it now. But what I want to add, what we can still improve. You know, Russia, it's small things. It's what Mr. Afanasyev said on the first session. We don't have the barriers now. We do authorize everyone to come and to invest into the Russian market. But then it comes to the fact, thanks God we sorted out the question of the settlement, so it's more easy, because as was my friend from Citibank was saying, Alexei Fedotov, it was a settlement Kama Sutra with 100 ways of settling securities. So now it's cheap, it's straightforward. We propose still 3 kinds of DVPs, but it's more, we are slowly moving from free of payment to DVPs. The statistics are good for this kind of settlement, and I hope that it will be improving. But we still love paper. In Russia we love paper, we love identifying everyone, and it goes to an extreme. And on any market, I don't know this kind of this passion for paper translation, and everything has to be apostilled and sealed and everything. So introducing the electronic voting, it will sort out this nightmare of the investor, where they have to make sure that the power of attorney are in place, when they have to discuss every time with the issuer that, okay, this form has been filled in according to the proper rules of the issuer, because the rules which are set up now, they are very broad. So if we move from this, if we simplify the identification, if we allow the English as official language for the documentation, I'm certain that the investors will say thank you to us.
Philip, is there anything you would add to that?
Maybe so. Not talking about the legislative aspect, which will be sorted out. There are still a few issues that needs to be worked on, I guess, to really make the appetite of foreign investors. And one, Maria touched base on it, is easiness of access. So to trade equities today, you need to appoint a local broker. That's not easy. That's a risk for foreigners to appoint a local broker. So this is still something that remains, despite the fact that yes, in Europe there might jump. Another consideration is today the way settlement functions, and mainly the cash side of it. So we still work in batches, despite the fact that the central bank runs an RTGS system. It's not very actively used. And the issue is that the liquidity is mainly concentrated in 2 of the 5 batches, cash batches. And if you miss one, it's very difficult to get to the other, because you don't really can receive and deliver cash in the same batch. So to me, yes, things are improving, but if the goal is to bring liquidity back to Moscow Exchange, I think that those issues will also have to be worked out at some stage, because otherwise, certainly in the current environment, risk is probably the priority number 1, and therefore we need to make sure that in the post-trade infrastructure we do not create unnecessary risks.
Thank you. Alex, is there
just a couple of words, Tim? I mean, I agree with what Maria and Philippe have already said, but I think at the top of every investor's list, in terms of what they're looking for in any market, is are their assets going to be safe, and that investor protection and legal certainty. You know, if they go to court, do they have the same level of protection as domestic investors? The other one that we've already mentioned, I think earlier, is standardization. That's key, in particular on the asset servicing. And I know that Ulf and the team will be talking about that in the panel that follows. I think these things are absolutely crucial. You know, in terms of allowing you know, foreign investors to get used to the same levels of information, the same formats, and also the same aspects of trading in any other markets. The more standard that this market becomes in terms of the other international markets, the easier it is, and the more flow we will probably see in the future.
I think the Deputy Minister had an additional remark to make.
I'd like to add a short comment on the risk and on the infrastructure that we're setting. Yes, we're trying to move the modern infrastructure into Russia, and as we can learn from what we've said, we succeeded in a couple of the last years, so it's basically here in place. But at the same time, we realized that the infrastructure, open financial markets, it has benefits and vulnerabilities. we're glad for that the OFC share holders share of the holders of OFC is not decreasing, despite of the events that are currently taking place, despite of all the tensions. But we also realize that the explanation might be not because of they're very loyal to Russia or they like Russia despite of anything, but we just also thinking that they might be caught in a situation because from the beginning of the year there was a devaluation of the ruble when they already been here, and it was the currency devalued like 10% or so, and then after that was a situation with regard to Ukraine was developing, and that affected the currency as well. So the exchange rate probably, that might be a reason that they are still here, because the exchange rate is keeping them here. I might be wrong, I may be wrong, but still there may be an explanation. And in case of the recovery of the exchange rate, we may anticipate that somebody would make this decision just to leave this, to leave the market, or to leave not to deal with this tension. We realize this, so we know that this has pros and cons of this matter. But still, nevertheless, just message is that we still stick to the open markets with not planning any capital outflow restrictions, currency restrictions. So it will be the same procedures, same regimes, and no additional limitations with regard to capital inflow and outflow. This is the major core principle that won't be affected.
Thank you, and I think a very important message for all market participants. If we can turn for a moment, maybe a question for Anna Vasylenko from Moscow Exchange. Is the launch of International Depositories Link for equities a strong incentive for international investors to trade Russian local shares? And how do you see this influencing future IPO allocations?
Basically, while we were talking to international investment banks earlier this year, there were quite a few comments about basically bankers that then we'll see you're clear here. It would be basically the last, how to say, Rubicon for international investors to come over to Moscow Exchange on the IPO. So they think that there is still some demand on the international investors who unfortunately didn't set up their accounts yet to trade Russian market. And they were thinking that basically while Euroclear and Clearstream will be here, we will see some portion of international investors coming over to trade Russian market, to participate in the IPO. But I think that the actual answer is how big is the pool, and how many of those investors who are looking into the Russian risk but didn't actually set up the accounts to trade. How many are them? And we had a discussion with all of the panelists while I was preparing for the panel, and the answer is not that simple. I think that Tim is one of the advocates of the opposite position, that most of the investors who wants to trade Russia is actually here.
Well, I think that there probably is if you think about the global pools of capital that can invest into Russia, and we, by the way, have participated as Goldman Sachs in a couple of the issuances last year that were fully local listings with Rossa as well as Moscow Exchange at the beginning of last year. There were still some challenges, and I think they're more of a technical nature that you were referring to in terms of how some investors were investing here, and I'm aware of at least a few U.S. institutions who still have some trouble with trading or holding local stock, and they tend to still do so on swap. But I think, just given that there was quite a different view, and maybe just to segue into the last question I had is to ask Euroclear and Clearstream to comment how successful YCSDs be in terms of capturing additional equity flow, and particularly in terms of new money coming into the market.
I think Opening up, the ICSDs opening up for equities will be a good thing for the Russian market, and we should increase by definition some of the volumes that come into your system. For the simple reason is that many pension funds, asset managers, when investing in certain markets, may have restrictions on custodians that they can use. They may say in the terms and conditions of my fund, you can only safekeep assets of the fund in an A+ rated custodian or AA rated custodian, which if you have to look for a local custodian in Russia may be an issue. Now that the ICSDs come into the markets, basically the risk that they will have from a safekeeping point of view will not any longer directly be on a local Russian custodian, but their risk will be on an ICSD, which both Glisser and Euroclear we still enjoy an AA rating. So by definition, by having the equities into an ICSD should be a very positive element for increasing the amount of inflow into your equity markets, which at the end of the day is what you want as well. You don't want to have the ICSDs linking up into Russia just for some marketing purpose. You want to see an increase of your flows, which is an element that is often a bit forgotten. But when you are a very conservative pension fund or asset manager, you look at custodian risk, which may have been a brake on entering the Russian market.
And now our companies will, once you're going to be here.
Actually, that was the bright side of good infrastructure here and of the presence of Euroclear and Clearstream. We realized that there is a risk and there is a limitation for major institutional investors that's holding them from investing here, because they have to follow their internal rules and use a certain level of ratings for the custodians. And being new here in the market, so that would hopefully bring a new money. I know that many investors there in the neutral position, they're sitting on the fence and just watching the situation, how it develops. And many people, they're not just refraining, they're not just withholding their decisions. And once, and the situation basically can develop either way. So, when the time is right, so the infrastructure is here, and I think that it would bring a lot of what we anticipated, actually.
So Philippe, and then Alex, I think you had something to add as well.
It's a pretty difficult question to answer. If we take OFZ as a benchmark, there was a big fear domestically that by having Euroclear joining, that all of the liquidity would move to Euroclear. Actually, the exchange has enjoyed 200% growth in terms of volume. So if that can be a proxy for equities, that would be a very good success. I think on the equity side, if you talk to money managers investing in emerging markets, today they could put up to 10% of their money into Russia. And they're far from there. So yes, they're probably in Russia, but with a much smaller amount than what they could do if they were feeling more comfortable. And there is indeed the infrastructure, the easiness of the markets. I think that one of the reasons, and that's something that is being addressed together with the Ministry of Finance, was the fact that a lot of investors are structured into very specific legal structures. In the US or in the UK, legal structures that, as of today, are not recognized under Russian law. And as a result, when those people want to participate to a chain of winning, they're rejected. And of course, if you reject it, then it means that you will never take a large portion of investment into a given company, because there is no way you can influence the management and the decisions of those companies. So I believe that beyond Euroclear, Clearstream being there, the market being more standardized, the complementarity of local custodians together with the ICSD, it's all of the other elements that will probably make the success and will hopefully bring liquidity back from the DR market into Moscow Exchange, because if you look at some of the major stocks, they're probably most actively traded in New York or in London than in Moscow. If we can contribute to that, then I think we've done what we were supposed to do.
Yeah, I fully agree, and I must say that what happened on the government bond market and what will happen on the equity market are two different things. And also, let's not fool ourselves. Infrastructure questions, risk around infrastructure are very important issues that need to be sorted. And clearly, we are seeing a great progress on that front. But that's not what will make international investors coming back on the local market. Let's be very clear on that. Until there is no clear, transparent legal environment in Russia, until country risk issues are not solved, until there is no change in attitude in corporate governance. It's not a question of having paperwork in English or in Russian. Corporate governance is an attitude, and clearly we are seeing that Russian companies and their beneficiaries are not willing to be friendly to minority shareholders. Until all this environment is not changing, you won't have international investors coming back in the equity market. The government bond market was a different story. On the equity side, you need to have a structurally radical change in order to attract international investors.
If I can afford to be slightly controversial on this one, I have to agree with what Boris just said, but I'm not as optimistic as my colleagues within the ICSDs. I mean, let's not forget what Euroclear and Clearstream are. They're depositories for fixed income. Yes, you can place your equities in there, but they are predominantly holding fixed income assets. My view on the equities, I don't think we'll see the same level of movement as we've seen in the government bonds, moving from local custodians into the ICSDs. I think equities are a very different animal. I think they're a lot more difficult to service. It's easy to service a government bond that doesn't have any tax implications. We're talking about corporate actions, tax reclamation services. These are going to be the real challenges. And the other thing that nobody has mentioned is, where is your counterparty? Who are you trading your Russian equity with? If you're trading it with, I don't know, Sberbank or VTB, are we expecting really the Russian major banks to be holding their inventory with the ICSDs rather than in their domestic market? I don't think so. I really don't. I mean, I wish my colleagues lots of success, but we also have a local business to preserve, and I'm sure the other custodians would also be fighting to retain their equities locally. And the other, I guess, small warning to the infrastructures is, you don't want these guys to eat your entire lunch, right? You want something to stay onshore, right? You want your, I guess, foreign institutional investors to be investing in Russia, to be investing in rubles, and you want to use these guys to make yourself more efficient in order to capture flow from them as well.
Alex, thank you very much. I think it's some very frank and candid views there. I think just a couple of very good points that were raised by a number of the panelists, and maybe whilst we've focused on the accessibility for the ICSDs to the market and what it means for equities, just on the influence of infrastructure modernization, and perhaps as a closing question for the panelists, and then we might have a minute or two for a question from the audience. For Anna, just what are the sort of future reforms that you're planning? What should we be thinking about over the next 12 months or 24 months? Whether it's regarding listing modernization, or, as Boris said, some of the corporate governance issues that need to be addressed, and how are you working with the Ministry of Finance and regulators with regard to introduction of additional measures to improve some of the challenges the market currently faces?
I would start with an easy question: corporate governance and listing reform. Listing reform is actually in place. All of the legislation and the actual listing rules are adopted, and we're moving to the new listing system, from coming up from the 6th list to the 3 lists, and with a new listing requirements, corporate governance requirements from the 2nd of July, or sorry, 2nd of June. And in terms of the corporate governance code, it has been adopted already. It has a recommendatory enforcement, and we are working closely with Central Bank on monitoring of the part of the requirements of the corporate governance code, which is in the listing rules. And we will be working further with OSR panel and with the Central Bank as well on how we will be actually looking after the companies, how they will be voluntarily checking their corporate governance standard, and the only obligatory requirements is they have to send a report of their standards in their annual reports. In terms of the other reforms, we actually working very closely with both the central bank and the Ministry of Finance on the certain area. One of the areas which we have been working is so-called Биржевые облигации, which already started some time ago, and we're also going to work with the central bank on some cases related to the equity prospectus, and also the foreign companies listing on the exchange. We already have a few examples. One of the biggest one is Lenta, which has been listed in London and on Moscow Stock Exchange. We're actually proud to say that we have about 20% of their total volume here locally. We hope to see some other companies as well, some other foreign companies. And we are trying to streamline the requirement for those companies, and also to make sure that we could do the placement simultaneously, same time in the foreign exchange and in the Moscow exchange. This is quite a few project where we are focusing now. I would hand over to Tim, and I think that we still have a few moments for a few questions. So please, if there is any questions from the audience.
If there are any questions, if you could raise your hand, and if you could identify yourself and your affiliation or institution before you ask your question, that would be great. She's got a microphone here for you if you'd like to wait for a moment.
Thank you. Ben Parker from UBS Investment Bank. We've seen very healthy growth in volume in Russia this year, certainly up until recent events. One of the observations, though, one of the anomalies, I guess, about the Russian market is that most of those investors, international investors, pay us for those securities in US dollars, free of payment. I'd like to ask the panel if, I guess, number one, does that matter? As after all, other Russian assets are paid for in dollars. And number two, if it does matter, what do we need to see happen to develop a proper DVP ruble market of securities?
I can start. I will give the only partial answer, and my colleagues will help me. So regarding what we propose at NSD to settle those bonds, we do propose a DVP in US dollars, but we also have a DVP in rubles, which was, to say, not despised, but not really used by the market participants. What the tendency we see, and it was even before all the crisis has started, we see there is a move to DVP in rubles. We don't want to become, I express what I can hear now during our meetings, but I don't think that this situation will change. We don't want to impose on the market participants the ruble settlement. We want to make it easy and make it, I would say, just play maybe with the tariffs or just with the easiness, but not to act, as a regulator might act, for example. But we do have this possibility, and we see the positive tendency. Now, for usage, the traditional usage of US dollars versus ruble, I know maybe my front office colleagues might comment on it.
Maybe I can comment on what we've seen, because not only for equities, it's true for other instruments, and that relates to the point I made earlier, is that the payment system in ruble is far from being attractive to foreigners that don't really understand how it works. It's pretty complicated and it's risky. So for me, that's one of the reasons why there is an urgent need to move towards the RTGS system. That I think if the market moves to the RTGS, I think you'll see a shift.
In our pipeline. In fact, we're rather busy in 2014, and we had to become reasonable while deciding on the number of the projects we'll be able to make. But apart corporate actions, which were one of the biggest projects, we also have an intention to work hand in hand with central bank. That's something we have done already in 2013, but there was no real results. We've made a tasting even of our TGS since in rubles, as you have said, it does exist in the market, but it's not really used. But now we will try to make it attractive. So we know this problem and we are working on it.
Thank you very much. I think there's perhaps a chance for one last question. If not, I can make some closing remarks. Okay, well, I'd like to thank the audience for your participation and your patience in listening, and I'd like to obviously thank the Deputy Minister and our panelists for their participation today. I think a lot of very important points that were made, a lot of observations about the successes that have been realized until now in terms of infrastructural improvements and modernization, and I think also some very important observations around the outlook over the next 12 months in terms of what further reforms we should expect, and also some of the challenges we will face over the next year. Again, thank you very much, everyone, and that will close the session.